my great honor to introduce this man because of what it is, what it was and what always it would be. A true inspiration in public speaking for many, actually even for me and for my husband, the other Sorlia in the conference. Although a humble man in appearance, when he speaks to people, his complexity emerges and the magic happens. And I guess that is something about magic, because otherwise I cannot explain why every time he has a presentation, the crowds are mesmerized with him. By sharing from his vast knowledge, work-related or not, from his life experience, and especially his passions, he is able to make you want to listen to his stories even for an entire day. And only such a complex person as him could come in front of us today with such an unconventional presentation regarding the complexity and how to understand it. Please help me in welcoming our morning keynote speaker, Peter Leeson. Sorry for my emotions, but I'm glad that you are here.
Hello? Yes? Bună dimineața!
Voi vorbi în limba engleză.
My job is to go into companies and to listen and to try to find the right combination of things to change your culture and improve the quality of your products and services. There are lots of techniques and principles and models and standards. They're all good, they're all wrong. I'll stand behind IT Days for the picture, okay? I stand behind IT Days. Agile, ITIL, CMMI, ISO 15504, 12207, 9001, all these are good things, all these are wrong. They will help you in some cases, they will just create more problems in other cases. So what I try to do is ignore all of them, take out the best pieces, and try to produce something which is handmade especially for you. And that's the reason that I'm going to give you now a fully handmade presentation. Okay, there is no typing, and there is no pictures. I've written it all out by hand. This is not the title that you saw on the program, but it means the same thing, just a little bit more complicated. I'm going to talk to you about complexity and chaos. So let's start with chaos. Chaos was the original Greek entity before anything else. Chaos was, for the ancient Greeks, the foundation of reality. Chaos is also something you encounter in your business on a regular basis. Chaos, all by himself, had 2 children. Some things we can't do anymore. Erebus and Nyx, meaning darkness and night. When you have chaos in your company, that's the number one thing that comes out. Darkness and night. The next level down is when you come out of the darkness at night, and the next generation, there were three. There was Tartarus, the abyss, where everything goes to hell. There was Gaia, Earth, where things are more solid and are working out. And there was Eros, love, where things really worked out nicely. I'm not going to go any further down. Chaos in mythology is the foundation of reality and the start of everything. Today, it's gone the other way. Change. Change. There we are. This is Rudolf Clausius. Rudolf Clausius was a Polish scientist who created this very important formula, delta S is greater or equal to 0. Delta S is greater or equal to 0 is the foundation of a lot of reality, because it is the only formula that proves that time goes in one direction. What this is saying is that heat can only transfer from a hot object to a cold object and can never go back. That sounds simple, that sounds obvious to you, but it had to be proven. The fact that we have got heat moving only in one direction, the second law of thermodynamics, proves that time is only going in one direction, and that contrary to what some of your managers believe, you cannot stop time or go backwards. This man proved it. Basically, what is happening cold is where all the atoms are nicely packed together and sitting and not moving. Hot is when the atoms start bouncing all over the place. So heat is actually movement, is energy, and it is somewhat chaotic. If you take a liquid, cold, you stabilize all the atoms, you end up with ice, nothing is moving, you heat them up, it becomes gas, it becomes vapor, it moves a lot. Which does not explain why there are bubbles in ice-cold beer, but not in hot coffee. So I'm moving to the next level, isothermal expansion. When you turn up the heat, the gas expands. It goes wider. This is the same for gas and for work. When your management turns up the heat, because things are going wrong, they are increasing the amount of work you need to do. In the normal situation, you think, you plan, you design, you build, you test, you deliver. Now management turns up the heat because something is going wrong and persuades you to just build and deliver. What happens? You're delivering bad quality products, you're increasing the amount of work necessary to fix things, you're increasing the amount of work necessary to support your unhappy clients, and slowly you find out you've actually got more work than before when you planned and designed and tested. And things start getting worse. And so management, now having turned up the heat, decides to turn up the pressure. So we've still got the heat, now we've got pressure as well, okay? You have to do this faster. Heating gas expands, you compress it. Work expands. We apply pressure to try and compress it. And the only possible outcome is it explodes. Surprisingly, a lot of companies still don't understand this. By now you're thinking, what the fuck is he talking about? Who let this guy come on stage and talk to us, and what has this got to do with my work? That's what it's all about, okay? Let's get down to it. Managing chaos and complexity in the workplace. And more specifically, managing chaos and complexity in the IT workplace. This is where we finally get to the title that you were expecting. I just like to baffle people with pointless bits of information. It amuses me even if it doesn't amuse you. Right. Let me give you an example. I've taken notes for this so that I don't forget anything. This is a multinational financial software company. It's a multinational financial software company. Working with some very, very large clients. You know just about all of their clients. I guarantee that. The development team is under pressure to improve quality, of course. One of the major clients is very unhappy and is deciding and has started negotiating to remove their support and their hosting in order to go somewhere else. This is a global company, and most other countries that have not yet started using this system are refusing to use it. The development team is rushing out, and they are producing 2 to 3 releases per day. They don't have time to test, so each release is creating more defects than it is fixing. There's no time to do stupid things like review the products. Team members are working overtime every day, including weekends. The executive team and the IT support team regularly make things better by buying new tools which you now have to use, and no, we don't have the time or the funds to pay someone to set these tools up correctly or to understand whether they actually answer our needs. Existing tools continuing to be used are legacy systems that have been badly parameterized, are not working. We've got high-tech tools, cutting-edge tools that are being used as filing system. We're just dumping information into them. Data knowledge management tools, they're just folders. When something is delivered on time, the team gets rewarded. So I remember one team that got rewarded for having delivered on time, and they got rewarded, the whole team got to go for a long weekend to Spain. Nice reward for the team because they delivered on time. The frontline support team was working 15 to 18 hours per day, 7 days a week to try and make that shit work. But it was on time. Doesn't work, doesn't correspond to what the client wanted, that doesn't matter. It was on time. While the team is sweating blood to make the system work, without any word of recognition. There is a guy from marketing whose office is just outside the CEO, who gets publicly rewarded for having put in a couple of hours overtime to finish a presentation. The sales team continues to push more sales. One client was very unhappy. The team was working overtime. The team was trying to deliver something. They were failing because too many promises. The salespeople were very good at promising standard features that didn't exist. Clients expected them to just happen. The sales manager went over to see the client because they were so unhappy and promised them that we would deliver more features in the same time and budget. In other words, increase the problem. Every month, for no obvious reasons, well, I say every month, it was more or less continuous, for no obvious reasons, we are redesigning the floors. So people on the first floor have to move to the second floor, and people on the second floor are moving to the ground floor, and we're just moving people around continuously. Nobody is sure why, and everybody gives the same answer when you ask, is that they decided. Who they is was never made clear. Subject matter experts. There are a few people who are alone in understanding key parts of the product, parts that require very specialized support. They're not available, they're at a customer site doing coding. The managing director is working as a business analyst at the customer site. The quality director is at another customer site in another country, busy translating requirements into stories, which he did not know how to do. Problems are solved by moving people from their current planned and prepared activities to the latest fire. All of this is authentic. It was all in the same company, and I am sorry that I did not make any of it up. So, there was a perceived need for a quality manager. And they brought on board a quality manager. No job description, no objectives, no clear understanding of what the quality manager was to do. That's me. I came in as the quality manager with a basic understanding that I was going to use my Harry Potter wand and make everything better instantly. Number one thing you have to be aware of when going into a company is functional stupidity. We've just heard Radu talking to us about smart management and smart meters and smart distribution and smart this and smart. Everything is smart today, except it seems the people. The people seem to be falling more and more into stupidity. And yes, I'm sorry to say that does include all of you. Why are they falling into stupidity? Because you have found out that it's not good to tell your management that he's wrong, that he's an asshole. You found out that they don't appreciate this. You have been told to follow the process. The process is bureaucratic, it's a nightmare, it's a waste of time, but you have to follow it, and it's not worth doing otherwise. We have got today this enormous conflict between artificial intelligence and natural stupidity. So you have to be aware of this. Functional stupidity exists at every level of the company. It goes from the CEO who is refusing to admit that he doesn't understand something or that he might be wrong, down to the software programmer who is doing what he is told even though he knows it is wrong. We hire the smartest people we can find, and then we chain them down to their desk. Fantastic book, I very strongly recommend it. It's the book I'm recommending most frequently for the moment. So, you've got chaos, everybody's overworked, everybody's running around, there is no time to improve, there's no time to think, and you need to find the way out. You need to move ahead. You cannot stay in this context without killing the company, and you will. Leeson's lesson. I can't believe I have been talking for so many years in conferences and things, and I've never used the term Leeson's lesson before. It seems so obvious. When you're on a plane, you've got these charming people who do pointless, incomprehensible signs about exits and tell you to remember that the nearest exit might be behind you. And probably in the plane there are one or two people who will actually turn around and bother to count seats to find out where is the nearest exit. If you don't know where you are, you will not get out. And that is what we are talking about. All these solutions, all these techniques, undone, Six Sigma, all these things, fantastic solutions, okay? There are books written about them which explain in detail how this was successful in 6 companies, and conveniently forget to mention the 5,000 companies that failed. Okay? Because consultants are also functionally stupid. They have their hammer, they're looking for your nail. They will keep on selling the same solution no matter what the problem. So find out where you are. And that is where Cynefin comes in. Cynefin is a Welsh word, and it sort of means our home, our environment, our place. It's a very good word that doesn't translate. This is Dave Snowden, brilliant man. I very strongly recommend you look up some of his talks on YouTube and look him up. Definitely worthwhile. This only ever changes the second time I push. No. The Cynefin is a sense-making model. It's not giving you the solution to what you should do, but it is helping you to identify where you are so that you can get out of it. Okay, it's not one of these standard models that tell you that what you should be doing. I should record my whole presentation, then I could just sit in a comfy chair. Basically what it is saying is that your situation, your status, falls into a number of categories. It's either ordered, you know what's going on, you can identify cause and effects, you can understand why you have arrived here, or it is not ordered, and there are a number of patterns emerging which you don't understand and which you cannot clearly identify. The ordered side, there are 2 bits to it. There's obvious, and it's complicated. Obvious, cause and effect. I've got a spelling mistake on my screen, I know how to solve it, I solve it. Complicated, well, it's complicated. The not ordered sign is also broken in two, and that is complex and chaotic. And once you understand this, you can start identifying what is the way out. So normally, there it is. This is the graphic that is used to explain it. I'll explain the various bits of this graphic. On some of the older systems, it's marked simple rather than obvious, but it was changed for very good reasons. Obvious and simple are very different ideas. Obvious, it's clear, it's predictable, it's repeatable. Obvious, it's like the Lego blocks, you know exactly what's going to happen when you put them together. You know what's the problem, you know what's the cause, you know what's the effect, and very quickly you can solve it. Complicated is where you need to call in an expert. Complicated is, there are causes and effects, but really it's not that simple. I need to do some analysis, I need to study things to understand what are the combination of causes that have produced this effect. Complex is where you cannot identify the effect from the cause. Complex is where, looking back, retrospectively, I can understand how we got here. Retrospectively, looking back over 10 years, I can understand why so many people where I live voted for Brexit. Okay? By the way, one of my great pleasures, I've been coming to Cluj for 12 years now about, and what I really like about coming to Romania is every time I realize that my politicians back home are not really that corrupt. Come on. This needs a new battery, I think. There we are. Chaotic, retrospectively, you won't find it. Chaotic is the area where the most common definition is shit happens. Okay? That's just, it happened. We have to live with it. Definitely need new batteries in this. Can someone change the slide for me? Hey, there we are. And then there's this middle bit. This middle bit. The middle bit is an additional piece. And it is basically that I am not sure where I am. It is the state of disorder. Disorder is, I don't even know if this is complicated or chaotic. I don't know where we are. And this is the worst place to be, because there's no way out of it until you've decided what you are. And this is the place where most companies are. So, why is this so important? When something goes wrong, when an event happens, you need to understand where you are to start with. Otherwise, you will just go to wherever you feel most comfortable. Different people will automatically go in different directions and will make the problem worse. The bureaucrat will automatically blame the process. Okay? We change the process, improve the process. I spent years selling the concept of process. And I very soon found out that nobody actually knows what a process is. But it's a good thing to change. It's a good thing to improve, whatever it is. The bureaucrat always comes back to this. Let's put in place process and documentation and make the thing a bit heavier. The expert needs to analyze things, and that's going to take more money and more resources and more time. Please give me time to do a proper analysis of the situation. I don't know when it's going to be finished, but I guarantee it's going to cost you a lot of money. The politician will call in as many people as possible because they don't understand the problem and they hope somebody has the silver bullet that is going to solve everything. So let's bring in loads of people. And then the final situation, we have got the dictator who will shoot the messenger and take authoritarian control. I didn't draw this one. This is the one I didn't draw. This authoritarian approach, dictator approach, the only certain outcome that you will get is chaos. It sounds good, he will say things that attract people and will create something a lot worse. So, what do you do with all this? Number one, you need to identify where you are. And you can identify where you are by having a look at the constraints, the limits, the barriers in the problem. If you have got fixed constraints, if you can say, if you do this, you will get that, then you're in the obvious area. That's fairly simple. If you have got, doesn't want to, does it? There we are. Governing constraints. Governing constraints means, yes, you need to do this, but you need to do a number of other things. But I can identify what those things are. I can identify a number of different aspects which will produce the result I want. Those are the governing constraints. It's complicated. If you have got enabling constraints, then you're falling into the complex area. The enabling constraint is not that you need to do these things in order to get that. It is that you cannot get that if you have not done this. So you really can look at it backwards, but it's very hard to look at it forwards. And finally, if you have got no constraints, then you're in the chaos mode. So that's fairly straightforward. You've got constraints. You probably know the constraints very rapidly. You know your company, you know your work, you know your organization, you know your management, you know your products, you can identify your constraints. So you've identified the constraints, you've identified the barriers. I don't think that should be difficult to do because you're in a known environment. And now you can decide what to do depending on where you are. New problem, is it ordered? Do you understand the constraints? It's not ordered, you understand the constraints. Find out where you are and then use your knowledge. So, if you're in an obvious situation, there's a 3-step pathway for each one of these. You sense what is the problem, you sense what is the cause. I think I know where this comes from. I know why I've got defects in my product. I know why my client isn't happy with our latest release. I can analyze this fairly quickly. I can put it in a bucket and solve it. It's fairly easy to classify, categorize it, and solve it. You've got problems. Check if your standard processes have been respected. Do you need to automate something? Is there a level of comfort where someone has decided, well, this never happens anymore, so I don't need to do that? Okay, you've put in place a solution to a problem that you used to have. Today, you never have that problem. Why are you still implementing the solution? So there's a level of comfort, and there's a level then that we tend to forget to do things. In a complicated environment, you sense what is the problem. It requires some analysis. It requires to go a little bit more in depth, understand what are the combination of causes that have created this. It's not an easy one to solve. Maybe you need to create a new process. Maybe you need to put something in place. Maybe this is a combination of things that you can expect to happen more frequently. We get into and by the way, you might want to have to do the categorized step as well. But maybe, depending on the results of your analysis. Complex? There's something that happens before this, and this is now probing. I'm going to try to run some simulations. I am going to dig a little bit deeper. It's not that obvious where my problem comes from. I've got to do some probing. I've got to try things. I've got to talk to people. I have got to try to identify who knows. So I'm going to bring together people. I'm going to ask for why does this happen? What can we do about it? Is this a normal situation? Is this something that is going to be repeated that we need to solve once and for all? I'm going to run some simulations. I'm going to run some safe-to-fail scenarios. In other words, I'll say, okay, what happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? What's the outcome? The safe-to-fail scenario, I recommend you pick scenarios that are possibly contradictory. It's very good if they are contradictory, but it is testing a solution knowing that it might fail. So don't start revamping your number one project, but do some small tests. Does it work? Can we get out of this? You might, maybe it's when I move too far back. There we are. You might still want to analyze and categorize as you proceed, as you move from your complex to something more complicated. Chaotic situation. Number one, do something now. Okay? Just get us out of this. Solve the problem. The first thing you have to do is act. Solve the issue, take dramatic steps. Going back to the case I was talking about earlier on, one of the first things I did in joining that company was to do a root cause analysis with the unhappy client. So I spoke to all the key players inside and outside the company and asked them their story. I spoke to the client. I explained, I'm not here to defend the company, I want to find out how it can be improved. Talked to all these people, put together a report which was about 40, 50 pages long, identifying what both parties had done wrong, what had happened, and what needed to be done in order to solve this. It was, I believe, very fair, it was balanced. The account manager reviewed it and said, send it to the client and let's get this thing moving. Senior management, functional stupidity, got very upset that we had said to the client that we had done some things wrong. They wanted a root cause analysis that proved that it was entirely the client's fault and publicly contradicted the account manager who had approved sending this out by blaming the messenger. Okay? Functional stupidity exists all over the place. By doing this, by sending out this report, first step is we brought down the number of releases. Unless it was dramatically blocking and you couldn't do anything, the number of releases went down from 2 per day to 1 every 2 weeks. So nothing is coming out. You can continue giving us all your problems. We're not going to solve them immediately. We're prioritizing them, we're bringing it back. We then moved from every 2 weeks to 1 release every 3 months. Then the countries that had refused to use the product started buying into it and wanting to get it as well. Then the client, one of the biggest companies in the world, who was negotiating how to get out of their contract, signed a new contract for 5 years. Okay? Act immediately, do something about it. The fact that we solved the problems was secondary. What made a difference was that someone came out and said, let's talk. Tell me why you're not happy. What have we done wrong? And I'm not trying to justify or explain things. I accept we've done things wrong. In every relationship, both people do things wrong on a regular basis. So the first thing you want to do is act. And once you've done that, then you can start working into sensing and responding with possibly the intermediate steps. Understanding how to act, depending on where you are, makes the difference between success and failure. Implementing your standard model response framework, whatever it is, your 5-step model to heaven, it's probably not going to work. But paying attention to what is the real situation and deciding whether to act and when to respond makes things better. Obvious, sense, categorize, respond. Complicated, sense, analyze, respond. Complex, probe, sense, respond. Chaotic, act, sense, respond. Very simple. This is the basic picture of Cynefin and how it should be used. It's a fantastic tool. Very simple. Not necessarily that simple to persuade your management to use. But then, of course, things happen. You've been in an obvious environment for some time, and after a while it turns out you're no longer in an obvious environment. Things get complicated, things change. And so, we need to understand what happens when you move around the model. Come to front of stage to change. No, it doesn't want to from here now. There we are. So based on this framework, there are a number of different pathways. You want to go from chaotic to complex. That's fairly straightforward. You don't want to stay in a chaotic environment. The only place you can go is to complex. You want to be able to circulate between complex and complicated. These two work very nicely together. I'll come back to that in a moment. You want to go from complicated to obvious, maybe. I am not necessarily convinced. And what you do not want to do is go from obvious to chaotic. And that happens too frequently. Going from chaotic to complex, do something, get it solved, put in place some controls, whatever is necessary to make things happen, to make things move. That is your priority. If you are in chaos, this is your number one priority. Understand what you can do immediately, try to bring some level of order down and solve the problem. Complex to complicated and complicated to complex are interesting. Because you see, complex brings out new ideas. Complex is exploration, while complicated is exploitation. So you want to be able to go back and forth between these two. From time to time, let go of the rules, do some discoveries, move into the complex environment. The big example of this, which you're all aware of, I'm sure, and I think it is Google who started this, which is saying, okay, for half a day, or from time to time, we're going to establish a chaos environment even. They went one step further and said, do whatever you want. Work on something, have fun. And then they brought it back. If it was useful, they brought it back. Obvious is the easy one. You know what the solution is. Everybody in your company knows what the solution is. You don't need management, you don't need reporting, you don't need any of this stuff. Obvious is where your cash cows go to die. If it's obvious to you, it's obvious to everybody else as well. And then there's the obvious to chaotic. Because of complacency, because of continuing to apply the same solution to a different problem, because of thinking, I know this, I don't have to worry about it, you fall into chaos. Typical example of this, and I know that some of you are familiar with what I'm going to say, even though you work in different companies and have completely different experience. You have got a small startup company, you have got an entrepreneur who is doing everything himself, who's built up the company, got in some big customers, has grown, has taken on more people, and hasn't understood that as an entrepreneur, he cannot manage a large company. And he continues to apply his entrepreneur solutions to growing complexity problems, and suddenly you have moved from a fairly obvious environment where we have one product and people who know what they are doing into a chaotic environment where people are doing stupid things without understanding and where senior management is interfering at all the wrong moments because they still believe they can do everything themselves. This is the danger area. So on the graphic, all the way through, probably haven't noticed, I know I hadn't noticed the first time, there's shading here. And there is shading because you cannot go back. This is a cliff. This is a fold in the paper. You cannot go back over it. If you go from obvious into chaos, you're going to have a long journey of moving from chaos to complex to complicated before you come back. Putting obvious solutions into place on a chaotic environment will kill you. Just a few words on the liminal Cynefin. There is an area here that is of interest. So you want to be able to circulate through this to some extent. You want to be able to go into complex, into chaotic from time to time, just so that you can identify new solutions, new things. Because you see, as you move around, you're finding different practices are useful. The obvious solution is where you find the best practices. The best practices are typically the past practices. They used to work. Maybe it still works, maybe it doesn't. The obvious context is probably where you are best placed to use a nice, good, old-fashioned waterfall model. Complicated is where you're finding good practices. Interesting. The area between obvious and complicated is probably the best area for time boxing, for sprints. Complex, come on. There we are. Complex is where we can define some emergent practices. These are new ways of doing things. In the complex, the emergent practices is where you want a clear dialogue with people. Pair programming, for instance, works nicely here because people are dialoguing, are discussing things, are trying to identify better ways of doing it. Chaotic is where you're going to identify the novel practice, the brand new thing that no one has thought of before. It is where suddenly you have to come up with something that is completely unknown today. And I get to my conclusion slide on time. There has been a movement over many years now of pushing people towards system thinking. The idea of system thinking is very much based on the concept that there is a continuous flow throughout the system. The problem with system thinking is that there is one element in there that is not systematic, and that is the human. The human is what destroys systems and system thinking by doing different things. In a complexity system, you're going step by step. So I'm identifying something, I'm trying it out, I've got a small system, I'm moving to the next one, and I keep on moving. If you want to survive, if you want to avoid falling into the chaos, please listen to the cynics. Encourage the dissenters. You need someone in your business who is going to go and tell the general manager that he's full of crap. Because otherwise he'll never know. Years ago I was in a Chinese company and we identified a number of weaknesses. And the team I was working with kept on saying, don't tell management this, don't tell that to management. Oh, you mustn't talk about this, and so on. And so we got to the last day, and I had the general manager, and I had all the directors, and I had all the project managers, and I had anyone who had word management anywhere near their job title in the room. And I went in and I told them every single thing that I had been told not to mention. That's what I do.